One interesting study read was, I think it was anthropologists were studying this tribe that was relatively isolated from the outside world. So they had their own culture. They were wondering if there's a gene for violence. So they studied the most violent individuals, the most ill-adjusted individuals in the society, and the most well-adjusted, the kindest, the gentlest. And they were actually looking for what's the difference in their genome. Can we explain this on a genetic level? But what they found, to their surprise, was they actually have one very remarkably similar gene that the rest of the population don't have. So they actually share more genetically than they are different. And people were mystified by this until, in the context of this drama of the gifted child, they realized that this gene is for sensitivity. That it's the more sensitive an individual is, they're more likely to react to their environment.
Yeah, how have you been since the last time we talked?
I'm good. I mean, it's funny when I get an idea, sometimes I feel like it happens too really quickly. So since the last time we talked, I've been all in working on that app I was telling you about. And I think we're within 2 weeks of launching. So yeah, yeah, it's been a concentrated time, but I look forward to, yeah, so I'm making an app that lets parents calculate the exact dosage of medication. That's Tylenol, ibuprofen, Benadryl, and Zyrtec. I got a lot of requests for Zyrtec because I mean, the dosing, there's so many problems with the way it's dosed. You go to the pediatrician, they give you one dose that works for that week before your baby gets heavier. So, I've always had this as a tool on my website for kinder, and I just thought I want to make it an independent thing. So one thing I've learned about the last few years of trying out multiple businesses is all these skills never go away. And even things that don't work out, you learn so much from just the process of putting something out there. So now each time it's time to do something new, like the friction is just less and there's a lower threshold to just do it. So yeah, I already had the formula. I went and got myself some designers, engineers, and it's very straightforward. So the most expensive part is getting a lawyer for the user agreement, but we're testing and hopefully this can launch.
That is super exciting. And also, just it's like a muscle that you flex. And then, like, the more reps you get in, just the easier it is just to get moving on these things. And um, a lot of people say to me as I've been, transitioning out of my, previous surgery job into this like kind of new pathless path endeavor, like, oh, isn't it like such a shame? They kind of see it as like a shame that I'm not putting the skills that I spent so long acquiring to use. And I don't see it that way at all. I mean, like all of the experiences that you have in life are just layered with so many layers of learning on many different levels and that apply to so many different areas in life. And yeah, just one thing you're talking about is just like having an idea and executing on it. That's its own skill.
I think the meandering part is actually necessary. So I was on a flight over the weekend and sat next to somebody. They always, of course, know a doctor who's thinking of doing her own business and blah, blah, blah. We got to talking. And this guy was like, you should totally start a physician branding slash business, like starting a business, consulting business. And I was thinking, that's actually I feel like I learned so much about how to think about what to make for people that's actually useful. And I've only learned that from making things that are not so good, that didn't meet the need or um, this meandering nature. Like before I landed on this app, it took all of those trial and error to get here. And I realized, like with Kinder, that giving my time virtually to patients while I enjoyed the one-on-one aspect, it wasn't an efficient use of my time. So I wanted to separate and build out things that didn't need my input, i.e. software, and then leave my time for the more human interactions. And I guess I could have learned that in a classroom if I went to business school. I don't know if they teach you to think that way, but I couldn't have gotten there without building something that after a while I was like, this is not really right. And I don't know exactly why. And it took that time. So, um, yeah, now I'm like, I really do want to start I would love to. I was just having lunch with our friend from med school and she was like having all of these ideas and it's hard to organize and be like, where do I start with a business? And landed on her starting a website and a newsletter, because you can start that before you know what you're going to go into. And again, all of these things, like learning to think like a business person, I really value these ways of thinking. But yeah, as a doctor starting out, I had no idea because we were trained to think just one way.
Oh, totally. Like, and there's like so many gems in there already. Because that's the exact advice that I gave to another. She's a resident about to graduate, and she's debating whether or not to pursue a fellowship, but her heart is not really in conventional medicine anymore. So she was kind of asking me for advice and guidance. And I gave the advice of like, just start a website, but it felt so daunting. She's like, where do I even begin? And it's intimidating and overwhelming. And yeah, totally outside of the realm of the skill set that we spent so long honing in medical school and residency training. But that was exactly the same advice I did. And I even just, I was like just walking her through putting together basic website on Squarespace. And I'm like, just get your voice out there and you'll start connecting with people and just exciting ways that you would have never, and you would never be able to if you don't put yourself out there. And then the same thing with like, starting a podcast, like it is, or a YouTube channel, and I've thought about the same thing, just even putting together short little courses of just how to, just like very basics for people just in the very beginning stages. I actually was just looking on YouTube for this kind of content. And I find that a lot of there's a real need for it still, because there's a lot of videos that are kind of really high level, but don't as much get down into just the nitty gritty step by step, just starting from nothing, which I feel like so many doctors are starting from. And yeah, it just increases your opportunities. And especially moving forward, I just think that the value that you get out of investing in yourself this way and just the opportunities that will come your way and allowing, giving yourself the opportunity to stand out in a field that tends to commoditize your skills and like who you are as a doctor, it is so insanely valuable. And then also, especially as just rote knowledge becomes, that's actually becoming more and more commodified in the medical field. I was just mentioning before we hit record the latest AI models that I was seeing. This was a headline just a few weeks ago. It's coming for medicine. Like the AI models are passing. There was one that passed the USMLE, US medical licensing exam. And then there's
What did it get?
I actually looked and it wasn't that impressive. It was a 67%. Which
Oh, they couldn't do ortho with that. No.
it's apparently 60% is the passing rate. And they're only going to get better in a rapid period of time. And then Microsoft also released biogpt, which demonstrated human parity in analyzing biomedical research to answer questions. And how, I mean, think about it. Like, how can a human mind really compete with the deluge of, medical literature that's published every day? How can a human mind keep up compared to one of these AI models? It then begs the question like, how the practice of medicine is going to change once these things are introduced.
Yeah, I actually had lunch with another person who was he's not medical, he's a PhD in genetics, and he built an app that's unrelated to this. But we were talking about app building, and I started talking about AI because I thought, as I'm building things, do I need to future proof it by giving it some sort of machine learning? Because I feel like that's the way we're going. And he actually he taught himself how to code, and then he built a whole app. So I think, which was very impressive. But from his understanding of I guess generative AI, is obviously so in its infancy that it gives you an answer based on the two words before and after it. And it's, of course, not yet understanding what it's putting out, but of course, the future direction is it probably will start to understand and then have its own component. But we started talking about how to get clinical thinking into an algorithm way so that a machine can reproduce it. Which is now that I'm into software building, I'm thinking about what else can I build that kind of can download some of my brain and thinking process into a software. And this exercise actually, like, I don't know anything about coding, and I know that AI is learning very fast, and that's maybe its biggest strength. But it almost showed me the distance between what it can do, at least right now, and how we think as a human approaching another human's problem. So in a way, instead of thinking that medicine or doctors might become less relevant with AI, I feel like our human healing powers are almost going to be more valued. And like now that I'm thinking about what's wrote about medicine, what can we put into a software versus what we cannot put into algorithm? Um, I think doctors can actually, there's a part of clinical thinking and judgment that I think will be a long ways, if ever, being able to be replicated by machine. And that part we need to identify and empower people to do better, which, yeah, hopefully they can with more time and understanding of how to do it.
Yeah, I don't think that AI will ever replace a physician anytime soon, but there's kind of this idea of co-pilots. So
Mm.
basically, how like I do think AI will be able to, massively up level a physician's capabilities in the clinic or maybe even the operating room. It'd also be really interesting how quickly the innovation is actually brought into the hospitals and clinics because um mm, it's amazing how difficult it still is to integrate software into the electronic health records, and that's a whole other discussion. But I'm just thinking, about my like running through my clinic and how many just calculations I'm doing manually throughout the day, whether calculating a light length discrepancy and predicting when to do like a guided growth surgery or something like that.
With an abacus.
Yeah, my phone, which and my also my I'm just so I have immense humility for my little ape brain. Basically, I'm just constantly making mistakes throughout the day that I feel like, for sure I would love to rely on an algorithm to help me, be a little bit more robust. And then of course, yeah, I just think it's going to be even I mean, you and I both know anyone who practices medicine knows this is that there are so many gray areas and gray answers. Like there is no one right answer for so many clinical situations. It depends on even if you have the myriad of factors seem to be identical from person to person, the emotional dimension and the psychospiritual dimension, will those ever really be able to be factored in? And I know I feel a lot better when I feel cared for by an actual person, like even just the difference between a more commodified type of clinic experience where you're seeing a different provider each time and they're just going through whatever check boxes versus having continuity of care with one person. I mean, it's just a different kind of experience. And I do think it will free not just doctors, but, every type of clinician up for more of that interaction with patients, which is a welcome thing.
I mean, so much of a doctor's day, you're actually doing two things. You're being a doctor and you're helping the hospital or the clinic run. And those are two different jobs. And they disproportionately fall, like the part that's less important almost claims more of your brain and your time. So I think that's a low hanging fruit for these things to be automated. Like I remember maybe being a pediatrics resident, kind of like internal medicine, you're running the hospital, you're keeping the patients going in and out. And I remember admitting and discharging patients. I was like counting how many clicks it took. It took hundreds of clicks in the EMR to do that and order sets. And like that's probably hopefully the easiest place to start because it's already rote. You're just making a person do the rote stuff. As for, yeah, freeing up time for spending a longer time talking or I don't know, in surgery, my husband's a surgeon and he works with a lot of the leading industry innovation stuff in the OR. And actually, over 10 years ago, they already did something like transatlantic surgery where the patient and the doctors are on two different continents. And he works with the French Institute that did that. But in the last decade or two, there's not been really that much advance in that because the surgeon's presence in the OR, which is something I don't understand, you would understand a lot better. It's just, there's like a mystical level to it that even somebody far away, it's hard to, even on a human level, it's hard to replicate. So I think that, by the end of our career, let's see what they will have accomplished in that area. But I just hope that the first thing they come in and help us with is running the hospital, the billing, the whatever, the non human aspects.
Yeah, all the aspects that burn people out, basically.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's an area I don't know much about, but I'm pretty optimistic about it because I think the direction or the goals and the questions people are challenging it with are exciting.
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic because I don't think it can get much worse than it has in the past, especially since electronic health records were implemented. Well, speaking of, there's been really interesting news. Well, this week is match week, which is a big week for graduating medical students, and I think brings a pit to the stomach of everyone who has been through that process. And it's been an interest. I'm just seeing some of the news of it kind of today, like going through some of some of the physician forums that I'm a part of. And yeah, first of all, match. What a crazy, honestly, it's just something that I hope, like, if I were to pick one area where I could kind of wave a magic wand and actually, I think changing this aspect of the medical training process would make a huge difference in sort of the mental health and well-being of medical students and trainees. I have a few recurring dreams, but one of them that brings me sort of the most anxiety and that I've actually been revisiting more in this transition period. And I think it's because it's echoing that other major transition period of my life, 7 years ago. Now it's themes around having no control, being like so much uncertainty, feeling an immense sense of dread. And I just feel so much for those students who don't match, then have to go through scrambling and or deferring, graduating from this whole training process for another one or sometimes multiple years. It's just such a grueling process. And especially just an immense amount of pressure just because of how much debt so many students take on. And I think a lot of students can't really imagine what to do with themselves if they weren't to match into a spot and actually, finish residency and become a fully licensed physician and practicing. And not only that, but it feels like it's not worth it unless that's the final outcome. But yeah, I don't know, what does this being another anniversary of Match Week bring up for you?
I'm trying to think if I know anyone going through the match, but we're old enough that we don't.
I know someone, unfortunately, who didn't match, and
Yeah.
I just
Oh,
yeah, I'm trying
okay,
to
yeah, see. Oh, well,
yeah.
first of all, we should explain what Match Week is.
Yeah.
So, it's a wonderful American tradition in the medical system where in March of every year, or before that, students pick their specialties and where they want to train. They do a round of interviews. Depending on your specialty, you're doing anywhere from, I don't know, 10 to 30 interviews. And then you rank the programs in the order of your preference, and the programs rank you as well. And some algorithm out there supposedly favoring the student's choice, but some algorithm that you have no control over assigns you to a program. So on match day, everybody in the medical school gets together, every person gets an envelope, and then you open it, and that's where you're going. And when you don't match, actually, the way we did it, on Monday of that week, you find out if you matched or not. And then on Friday, you find out where you go if you do match. And most students do match, but some don't. And especially with the spots for residencies there's fewer spots than people trying to match every year. And if you're into something very competitive, then there's a higher chance that you don't match. And then there's the scramble, or for the rest of the week, you try to get into any empty spot. And then if you still don't, then you're basically out of a job. You can do research and, just thinking back, we've had friends who didn't match, doing something very competitive. And I know a few of them went into that research year and then matched the next year. But we also know people who repeatedly didn't match and they tried and tried to keep. And it's demoralizing to a degree I don't actually understand because I didn't go through that aspect. Um, but yeah, it's kind of I don't really understand how it started. I guess it was a way to ensure that every residency spot gets filled in the country because residents run the hospitals. Without residents actually teaching hospitals would just collapse. They provide more than medical care. They're the administrative layer that allows the hospital to run. And residency spots are funded by Medicare, so it's a government controlled program, and you can't just add spots if you want to. So I guess it started as a way to ensure that the hospitals get their people. And I never understood why we can't do it in a traditional job interview type thing. Maybe that's too much work to go back and forth and get offers and choose an offer, or um, and it's almost become this, like with every tradition, even horrifying ones, there's some like camaraderie that comes out of it. It's so like you talk to a doctor about match day, they all know what it is. They all went through it. And yeah, I mean, you and I went through it together. It's very, like we at least didn't have families when we went through it. But now I keep thinking, now that I have a family and a child, like, imagine being the partner where you're just going wherever. And then for people who do fellowship, that happens again. And if you do other, like, it keeps happening where it's almost like being, it's like being in the military or something. You get assigned to where you're going, and for your career to continue, that's the only choice. So, yeah, I think many would say that it was a traumatizing experience. I think for me, I remember being really happy that I didn't have a spouse or a child to worry about. I could just go to any of the places, and that made it a lot better. But yeah, kind of having your no control over your future like that is it's not like you said, you still bring up feelings about it almost a decade later.
Yeah, like really strong feeling. But I don't think it's overstatement to kind of categorize it as a mildly traumatic experience, especially if you end up not matching, because your whole world kind of crumbles and all of a sudden you're just deep in this soul searching period, really. And even if I know I'm so grateful I didn't have a family at the time, but a lot of the anxiety I actually personally had was around matching into like a smaller town, a program in like a smaller town. And I was single at the time. And I was actually really concerned that I wouldn't find a partner if I matched into one of these small towns. And I was pretty adamant about not dating anybody in medicine just because of that coordination issue. So many doctor couples face. And that's actually a large part of what in my recurring dream is that plays out where I match into some small place and I don't end up finding a partner, and then I end up never marrying, and then my fertility window closes and I never become a mother, and my work that I thought was going to save me, I was going to be like a Mother Teresa type of archetype, just dedicate myself to medicine, and that didn't really pan out because of what healthcare actually is. And so I think there's all sorts of dimensions to the anxieties that medical students face in this process. And then, yeah, I mean, not to mention if it's just so much added stress if you're coordinating with a partner, and then God has blessed the people with children in this process as well. I really do admire people who make it through training with children. Yeah, I think that also we are just I, at the time at least, was so radically unprepared in terms of my mental state with facing all of that stress. Like didn't have any practices for letting go of just that really intense desire for a particular outcome and just hinging my entire identity on that, and feeling like, our psyches don't really differentiate between that type of existential stress and also actual physical stress, like you feel like you're going to die, that they're actually quite similar sensations in the body. And yeah, I wasn't meditating. I hadn't done any psychedelics. Like I was fully identified with my ego identity. And all of that just leads to an intensity of the suffering. And I keep reflecting on, especially as I'm trying to counsel medical student through not matching. And I feel like I hear, just being, from the field of orthopedic surgery, given how competitive it is, I mean, almost half of the applicants, I don't know what the latest statistics are, but when I was applying, I think there were 1,200 people applying for something like 700 spots. So a significant chunk of people are not matching into their chosen specialty. And I just hear anecdotes about it all the time. And I would say that the ways that I'm counseling people is really through mindset because they're still letting go of this illusion of control because there's only so much you can do. And then having, practicing letting go and letting fate take you where it may. And while it might not, if you're listening to this and you didn't match, while it might not make sense right now, things tend to have a way of working themselves out and making sense in retrospect. And every challenging experience that I've been through, I have come out on the other side just with greater wisdom and compassion. And also, just, I mean, in some ways, it's like, not that I ever wish I didn't match, but I can't hold space for people who haven't matched because I didn't have that. I don't have that experience. I can't really imagine, I can only imagine what it is like. But I do see so many people persevere through it and end up in their chosen specialty and, most likely just richer in life experience because of it. But wow, I really would have been served by having some sort of practices going through that process and actually going through the fellowship application process, however many, what was it, 5 years later when I was in residency applying for fellowship. Granted, it was not as intensely competitive in terms of applicants for number of spots, but still I had a desired program that I wanted to match into. I had my number one program, felt like I worked hard towards it throughout residency. But my experience of interviewing and going through that match process was like night and day. And there are probably many different reasons for it, but I do think a lot of it had to do for sure with my mindset and maintaining this meta perspective and not being so identified with that particular outcome. And also, I mean, the practices I'm thinking about are, meditation. I think stoicism is a fantastic practice for medical students and residents where you're actually envisioning your worst case outcome and actually experiencing it. And then you kind of see that, oh, wow, everything that I fear, I don't actually have as much to fear as I thought I did. And also just trusting that the world is so much bigger than than our human minds kind of make it out to be. I say it's not like you go through these things and you no longer have any desire. You still have desires, but they're just loosely held. You kind of just set an intention and then let it go.
I think part of it is also the age. Like, I was exactly 26 years old going through that, and later I read that study about how our brains don't mature until 27 or something, and I actually really believe that. Like, I remember being 27 and feeling different, and I couldn't explain why. I mean, that could also be when this all started for me too around the same age, and maybe it's the trauma that pushes you to explore a little bit more about yourself, but part of it is also like, sometimes I don't know what your views are on, like, people younger than that, like, in their early 20s or even their teens seeking this, where I almost feel like I only know the way I experienced it, but almost going through this is helpful for the later realization part where you understand what you went through. But I just wonder, like, back then, if I had known like, could I know back then what I know now? I don't know. I don't know how to think about that. But like, what you said is true, and I think in a way, it actually applies to your experience. If I remember correctly, you had you had another top choice for your residency. So and it all worked out the way that you better than you could have imagined. But at the time, it's so hard to hear that it's gonna work out because your view is so myopic, you can't see past that, the one vision.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. So I matched at my number three program. And I remember, I mean, huge sigh of relief when I matched that Monday. I also had I was applying to a very competitive specialty, and I would say I was a pretty mediocre applicant. It was like middle, nothing quite, very special about my application. And so I was just fully mentally prepared to like go work for a health tech startup or something if I didn't match. I was going to figure out a way. My plan was not to do a research year, not to do a prelim year. I would take that as a sign from the universe that it's not for me. And I think that probably was a bit of foreshadowing. Yeah, I matched into my number 3 program, and I opened up that letter. Like felt like I had, yeah, I just remember that feeling, and I cried later that day when I called my mom to let her know. And, yeah, now I feel
I remember that.
my career, yeah, I'm pretty sure I cried to you, and I, my current self just can do nothing but laugh with compassion because it was the best thing that ever happened. I mean, obviously, I would have never there's so many because I was attached to this illusion. I mean, I didn't even have the language to understand this, and yeah, maybe I could have understood it in this way because my brain might be like, "You don't
I
have
don't
a
know.
lot of your fully
I mean, I
formed."
wonder.
But it's like a total illusion that I was grieving. What I thought my residency experience was gonna be like and what it would lead to and all of the future that I was grieving, which hadn't happened yet. And it's just like, oh my gosh, there's so many other things that are gonna happen and unfold for you that you can never ever predict. Like the most beautiful, exquisite experiences. Like I met the love of my life. That would have never happened had I met at my number 1 spot. And I wouldn't be who I am today without those experiences or matching where I did. And so, yeah, just kind of, I'm a bit romantic like that though. Now I just kind of, I'm much more leaving things up to fate, just trusting that now what I deem as good or bad is just so, yeah, it's myopic. It's how can I mean, there's no way that I ultimately know what is good or bad. And that understanding, I think, will continue to serve for the rest of my life because we are never ultimately in control of most of our life, the total illusion. And so whether it's experiencing, I mean, way more hardship than something like not matching at your top program or even not even matching. I mean, when it comes to like the real the real events in life that shake you, we're talking about like divorces or death or of loved ones or just real, actually, the things that lead to real human suffering and tragedy. Those times will come for all of us, whether we are prepared for it or not. And just being able to weather those storms, I think, comes from having these more challenging experiences earlier in life that help you kind of build a kind of resilience and a trust in life that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, and sometimes when I see kids, like I think about this, how to teach my son how to think through these. And I know one, like when you see a little kid having a hard time about something, of course to us it's funny, but you know that it's really real to them. And I think it's interesting how to counsel someone or counsel ourselves in you can't discount the fact that it's real. It doesn't mean like just because you saw past it later, it doesn't make it any less real in the moment. And one thing I started learning to say to my patients as a pediatrician, especially to new moms, in that really tough stage, is what they're feeling is real, even if it's not true. And I think it's easy or it's important to hold that dual truth about what we feel. And, like it kind of changes when I think about how to teach all this to children. That's another question. But I do want them to almost go through that the kind of challenges they're going to have in life, because without that, there's not going to be a profound growth or realization of how to be better. Uh, but, holding their truth in that moment to be real, and then also letting them practice seeing beyond it. It's actually very tricky. I don't know. My son is too young to to actually think about how to do this, but it's something I've started thinking about.
Oh, for sure. I mean, my kid is what, a year and a half older than yours, and already I'm considering those things as well. When I mean, even something as little, when to intervene and when to just let them learn on their own.
Yeah.
And so, because I think so many times we can intervene, I mean, the same thing for a patient's journey, for anything. I mean, this is all kind of different facets of the same phenomenon, which is just like, these are all just various different relationships. I do think there is, a fine balance there, and we don't always get it right about sort of guiding our children and letting them figure it out on their own. I think back to sort of how my parents raised me, and of course, we always are very much informed by our own experiences as children with our own parents. But I think I benefited from not having my hand held through everything. It made me have more agency and be more independent, kind of in my studies and in my whole path. And things weren't laid out for me on a silver platter. And so I think I kind of take that same approach. But to each their own, like we'll see. We'll see how the kids turn out.
I know, it's so much like, I want to be that parent that unless there's physical danger that I'll just let it be, especially in the playground and stuff, but there's also instinct, and I know that before I get there, I cannot say what I would do. There's what I want to do and what I believe is good for him, which I agree with you there. I also just love like, he's too young to be aware to play with other kids. I know he's not developmentally there. I just love kids his age when they run into each other. Like, we were on the flight this past weekend, and so it's my husband's turn to take him. We were not seated together, so he got to have a good flight with him. But he said that he was sitting on the ground in front of him, and this other kid the same age came over, and the two of them just stared at each other for 5 minutes without moving, just, like, regarding each other, like, "There's another one that's my size," you know? And then slowly, the other kid put out a finger like ET, just reaching towards him, like, held it in midair, and but my son was too young to, like, realize what that was, and my husband actually put his finger out. Did that but, yeah, it's funny to watch, like, socialization come online. I think it's great that you guys have a nanny share that, he gets that interaction. I've been thinking we need to do more stuff like that, and hopefully with siblings, that's how you learn to socialize. But, yeah, as they get into that's the advice I hear about siblings too. If they have a have an issue, you should stay out of it as much as possible. I didn't have a sibling, but in my culture, I mean, there's a lot of parents interfering, like, "You're the older one, you have to let him, blah, blah, blah." And that really is not great for sibling relationships, and I guess the home is the one good place to practice being hands off and letting the kids do their own thing, because ultimately that's where they learn.
Yeah, I mean, they have to practice and they have to troubleshoot on their own, and sort of where I think having a firm boundary is important in terms of when to intervene. And yeah, it's right around physical physical hitting going on, which is definitely happening. And we're also facing this. Both boys have this issue with just chucking some toy, a metal little
Yeah.
car, and we're having to teach them like, okay, not throwing hard things, and especially not throwing hard things at another person or the dog.
I don't know how kids used to survive without as much parental attention. Like, our home is definitely not completely like, childproof. Kind of a European thing to not completely, they do have to learn the dangers and stuff, but as a result, yeah, you have to keep such a close eye on them, and their instinct is, like, not for survival. So, I don't even understand how it would work. Yeah, they just leap off, throw things around. Yeah.
My friend was explaining this to us. I think he was reading, I forget which book I want to say he was reading it in a book called Raising Lions, which I haven't personally read yet. But in that book, they talk about sort of the God phase of development that babies and
Mhm.
toddlers move through before they fully develop kind of their own separate ego identity. And, it makes sense because when you're an infant or a toddler, you have the ever present parent or primary caregiver there to look after your safety. And so if you're on a couch and you decide to take a leap, there's always someone hopefully there to catch you.
Not always.
And it doesn't always happen, but as long as there's no long-term view, that's okay. And so, yeah, it's no surprise that they have these little God complexes. And yeah, it's fascinating. It is just so cool. I mean, just like learning, like we talked about before, it's like we're getting a PhD in sort of child development. And there's so many dimensions to it, the social, the emotional, the intellectual, and it's delightful and challenging. It's all of the things.
Yeah, I mean, 1 year is actually when the ego emerges, and I've always recited this fact, and now I get to watch it emerge, and it's fascinating because before 1 year, the lack of an ego means that a baby thinks when he or she feels something, the whole world feels it. When they're hungry, there's no separation. But when the ego emerges, it's actually it can be very distressing for them to realize I am not my mom and to deal with the separation, the tantrums can start, but also the clinginess, you know? I actually kind of enjoy the clinginess so far. It's very cute, but I can see that almost, like despair to realize I am an independent person. I am not you, and I need to be close to you, which is I think is a beautiful thing to watch, but also, to keep that in mind when we deal with tantrums, like at the 12-month visit, the 15-month visit, I think it's very important to already have a plan for parents of thinking through how they're going to deal with it. And the most important thing is to not interpret it in the lens of what it would mean if you were doing that. If you were hitting somebody in the head with a ball, that means something completely different. And I think when I hear parents speak to kids, a lot of times there's no distinction. They're like, why would you do that? That hurts. We forget that developmental differences is a real big difference. So meeting the kid where they are, and I think just not assuming their motive is what you would think it might be from the outside, it actually makes a big difference. But yeah, observing that and giving them almost a space to be themselves without judging them as this or that, I think it's hard to do at this age, but it's fascinating to see.
Oh yeah, not only is their ego coming online around that age, but quite a while before they realize that, oh, other people have an experience of self and other people have their own feelings and desires. And so there's quite a bit of lag there. And so become extremely egocentric and it's not their fault. But yeah, if an adult were to behave the way that a toddler
Yeah.
behaves, they would have they would have no sustainable relationships, and yeah, it's actually absurd to judge them at the same standards that we would an older child or an adult. I mean, honestly, there are quite a few of us adults walking around who haven't totally figured these things out, and so I think it's vital to just get like some basic understanding, and this is why parenting is is so demanding. And it's honestly, especially if you already have a demanding career or job, and if both parents do, and it's like having another job because you're learning. It's like being in school, like you're in night school, weekend school, just all day school on top of your job, learning about your child's development. Yeah, and everybody's doing the best they can. But I wanted to ask you what you have, like, kind of go-to resources for that you like, that you've used yourself for kind of giving parents the 411 on kind of just like basic child development stages so they can kind of understand their kids better.
I think the authoritative resource is the drama of the gifted child. It's kind of a dense read, but it's pretty readable, and it's actually a thin book. It's actually written by a scholar, I think she's Swiss, about when you have a sensitive and gifted child, they're actually more prone to trauma from their environment. So the drama with the gifted child is that they're more likely to be traumatized, and that you have to handle their developmental stages as appropriate to that age. And I mean, this is an old book. I think now it's not certainly not just for gifted children, it's for all children. But I would say it's the authoritative book where all of the rest, the conscious parenting, the attachment parenting, it all came out of this idea. And I can't remember where I read this. One interesting study read was, I think it was anthropologists were studying this tribe that was relatively isolated from the outside world. So they had their own culture, and they were studying the gene. They were wondering if there's a gene for violence. So they studied the most violent individuals, the most ill-adjusted individuals in this society, and the most well-adjusted, the kindest, the gentlest. And they were actually looking for what's the difference in their genome? Can we explain this on a genetic level? But what they found, to their surprise, was they actually have one very remarkably similar gene that the rest of the population don't have. So they actually share more genetically than they are different. And people were mystified by this until, in the context of this drama of the gifted child, they realized that this gene is for sensitivity. That it's the more sensitive an individual is, they're more likely to react to their environment. Now, whether their experience is traumatic and leads them down that more violent path, or their experience is nurturing and safe and it leads them to the other path, they actually share that trait. I thought that was fascinating because it shows you how the fact that your child is very sensitive, and smart and intelligent, is almost an added challenge for you to be mindful of the experience they're having. And I think, yeah, I recommend that book for anybody who has children, who works with children, or just wants to understand parents and kids and that whole interaction. So a more modern, I guess, resource, everybody knows the holistic psychologist. It's like the.holistic.psychologist on Instagram. Recently, she has done more parenting content. She has talked more about conscious parenting, specifically how the roles that the childhood home, the people that take on those roles, how it feels to the child when they are ignored, or how, when they're being talked to in a certain way. All of these, she lays it out in very understandable formats. And I think those are, and she's also a wealth of knowledge for self-healing, like the work to do on yourself, which of course is one and the same, because I think as a parent, you owe it to your child to work on your own understanding of your own consciousness and self, so that you can provide some separation. So you're not projecting all of your stuff onto your kids. And I think the less we understand there, the more projection there is. And for many, many generations, that's how all of us were raised. And again, like you said, everyone's doing their best. And even going through this, we're never going to be perfect parents. But for me, I just love reading these things and understanding what I'm seeing for the first time. Like everything I see, or even my instinct in myself, it all makes so much more sense. And that gives me some sort of, not security, but reassurance that it all makes sense. And therefore, you can have the agency to do things a little differently, if not perfectly, just a little bit differently. And yeah, just yesterday, I read this other story about a father who takes his daughter to gymnastics every week, and he sits there for for an hour while she does her practice. And one day, his phone happened to die, so he had nothing to do but actually sit there and watch her. And he noticed that every 2-3 minutes, she would look back and try to make eye contact with him to see if he's watching. And he's never noticed this before after, a year of taking her there. And he noticed that the other kids were actually doing the same thing. And when they check back at their parents, they're all on their phones, as we tend to be these days. And literally all of us have done that. But that's where kids live. They just, the connection they have with you, the checking in, the reassurance, that is their whole world at that stage. And it goes so fast. So I think, and I don't want people to think that if they somehow didn't do the stage the way they wanted, that it's too late. I think there's always something to be gained from learning about this. And if your kids are 17, if they're 27, I think it's still time to, repair that relationship. But the earlier we learn about it, I just feel like it's like a gift it's almost like unlocking this mystical thing. And there's so much to be gained. So yeah, those are my two favorite books. And also the one I always recommend, Scattered Minds by Gabor Mate. This book is about ADHD, but it's actually based in developmental theory. And it shows you why kids develop ADHD. But also, I think if you read that, it also shows you why we all have ADHD nowadays. And and how he's treating his own ADHD through a combination of the reparenting techniques and these behavioral therapy. But if you want to understand child developmental psychology, those three books, I think that's all you need.
Oh, I love hearing that piece of it. It was like, okay,
Yeah, that's all you need.
you have $3
Just
and you'll be ahead of probably 99% of
yeah,
people. Like that.
every yeah, every see, you're still a gunner.
But I like that word. It's just like it's totally
Yeah,
tackleable,
I know,
and
I'm
feels like you
kidding.
could actually accomplish that, and it feels good.
Oh, well, I actually think if you could only read one book, you could just read The Drama of the Gifted Child. That's like it's a thin book, and I'm the same way. I'm like, I can't read there's 20,000 books on this topic, but every other topic is a regurgitation of of this idea. So if you wanna go to the source and just read something short and based on research and evidence, that's it. And the Gabor Mate and the other books are more readable to me and more ADHD focused. But yeah, I promise it's like you're gonna get 99.9% of everything in those books.
Nice. The Drama of the Gifted Child, we're gonna include it in the show notes. And I make this joke from time to time that we parent the way that we were traumatized as children.
Yep.
And so, I think when we become a parent, you can't help but reflect on, I mean, you just have a new perspective on what it was like for you at that age. And also, there's this idea of doing inner child work. And like you mentioned, reparenting, which the holistic psychologist touches on a lot. I would say that's kind of the core theme of her content and how, like, just really that kind of work becomes vital, I think, in your parenting journey. And at the same time, to be cognizant of the pendulum swinging too far in overcorrection,
Mhm.
if it, I think is sort of just a healthy awareness to bring to all of, I think about that a little bit with Jonathan Haidt's book, the coddling of the American mind. I think there's been a lot of awareness brought to this idea of childhood trauma and just how sensitive children are, and so, a parenting generation of parents like making every effort to prevent that for their children. But there is a balance there.
Mhm.
There's nuance to this. But also, if I had to just to kind of double down on what you brought, which is the idea of bringing full presence to your children, and that's really what they crave is to be seen and heard in addition to being loved. It's so easy to fall into the mundane aspects of parenting because, especially, I mean, the younger the child, the more sort of repetitive these these things can be. And sort of starting to check out and seek novelty in our phones when we're watching our children. And I spoke about this on another podcast. There's just this idea of bringing the mystical into the mundane, which is really about cultivating full presence. But do you even really know what full presence feels like and what that is like? Like that is something to practice, and becoming a parent is such a beautiful opportunity for that practice. Like I find that I actually don't need to I was stuck, especially right after my son was born. I totally didn't have a meditation practice. I had my usual practices as I was just like getting through, survival mode and newborn phase. But then slowly came to realize that, oh my gosh, like this is, this is what the meditation practice was for. Like it's not just the idea isn't just to cultivate mindfulness while you're sitting on your cushion for, however many minutes. And oh, I need to have like the perfect setting, it needs to be quiet and peaceful and all of that. It's bringing full presence to the present moment, just being fully here and now. I'm not in the past, I'm not in the future, and I'm just engaging all of my senses in the here and now. And when you do that, when you're parenting, oh my gosh, there's so much that we miss out on when we're not doing that. And especially with how fleeting these phases are with our children, it can feel like days are long, but the years are short. But is that kind of, favorite saying? Or I hear so many, especially parents, or, people whose children are grown say, oh, it happens so fast. It happens in the blink of an eye or something like that. And I kind of question that a little bit because I wonder like, well, how present were you? Because when you're fully present, you actually it's possible to experience it's like it's a small moment of eternity in that instant. And when we're like really paying attention and the memories that you're also just embedding in your mind and your body when you're fully engaged with the present moment too, just become so much more vivid. And I think it doesn't necessarily, I don't think like when I'm reflecting on, my first 2.5 years with my son, I don't have that feeling of like, oh, it's happening. Yet, yes, I'm like, wow, it's surreal to think, oh, he's like becoming preschool age. We're now looking at schools and that kind of thing. But at the same time, I don't have that sensation of it happened so fast because I wasn't paying attention close enough.
When you said, "What does being fully present feel like?" I almost was gonna say, "It feels like your phone died."
You're not like in withdrawal
Yeah.
situation.
No, but I know what you mean, and for me at least, even knowing all this, like, I cannot be fully present there 24 hours a day. It almost feels like I'm meditating because it takes so much energy. It's like a not a passive experience, it's like I'm actively trying to pay attention, and I can only sustain that for so long, which I think is fine, and when I can't anymore, or I have other things to do, that's why you have other attachment figures. Hopefully, you have your partner or whoever else is there, or he's playing by himself. Um, so I totally agree with you, and I have this note on my phone. I try to write down, like, when I'm fully present, the things I'm picking up on, and it's like, what do I see? What do I feel? Like, it's that kind of memory, and, no, I feel the same way. I think we're very blessed to already know that this is a time that goes fast, and we have to pay attention to already know that, and I feel like, for my own parents, I don't think they knew that, and I feel bad for them that they didn't, you know? Yeah, but knowing this and being intentional about it, I think, yeah, even just a few minutes or however much time you can do, it can be like a very different experience to be there.
Oh yeah, I don't think it takes very much time at all. Like, I mean, it's definitely not sustainable 24/7. Nor is it necessary because I think even I've seen even just 15 minutes of just really checking in, not doing anything else with your
Mhm.
child, or having a day where you take some quality time together, or have a day like that. Those are the moments that they, and it's consistent and it's regular, but not all the time, is enough for a child to feel like they're really seen.
Yeah, if it's 24/7, he'd be like, "Leave me alone, mom."
Yeah, it'd be suffocating. I know. Get a line.
I know. Um, no, but it's, yeah, I think these we can talk about this forever, and, yeah, let's just check in every few weeks. I love, digging into we have a lot to dig into with, the stuff in the past too.
Yeah, and we'll start soliciting questions too, kind of through our various channels. And if there's something that you've been thinking about on your mind and you think would be interesting for us to discuss, just given our, particular perspectives, we would love to have that input. And we're just beginning. Hello, beautiful people. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do hit that subscribe button. And as always, leaving a like or a comment, sharing or leaving a review. All of that is so, so appreciated as we help to grow the podcast. And if you are interested in learning more about my work as a psilocybin facilitator and integrative wellness physician, please do visit my website at www.elusiahealth.com. That's Elusia, ELEUSIA, health.com.